Before this video begins, I would just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. We just saw a huge and insane drop of previously confidential Doctor Who information that changes everything we knew about a number of Series 7 episodes. So a while ago there was a big charity auction selling off loads of props, costumes and even scripts from modern Doctor Who. And trust me, I wanted everything. But even my YouTuber cash wasn't enough to even get close. However, some lucky people managed to get a hold of some Series 7 scripts. According to Reddit user Penguin Tim, they and their friends were able to buy drafts and shooting scripts of The Power of Three, Angels Take Manhattan, Hyde, Night of the Doctor, and Time of the Doctor. And luckily for us, they scanned them and freely posted them all online, so we can all enjoy these artifacts together. There's a goldmine of cut content within these pages, some confirmations of rumours like how badly Power of Three had to be recut due to the main villain actor being impossible to work with, and some reveals completely out of left field like the original way the 8th Doctor regenerated in Night of the Doctor. So let's take a look into these forgotten pages and explore just how much we lost. I think the best place to start is by going in chronological order, especially since the shooting script of Power of Three is one of the most interesting out of the whole set. First of all, the whole cold open was meant to be completely different. Rather than the very simplified opening we get, the pre-titles were meant to include the scenes of the Doctor, Amy and Rory in Henry VIII's bedroom, Amy talking to her friend about attending the wedding, and there was even a whole cutscene of Amy and Rory saving the day on an alien world. It very much feels like the intention was for the same kind of opening we eventually saw with The Caretaker. These contrasting lifestyles running alongside one another rather than being these scenes scattered throughout the narrative. The pacing is very different, and condensing it all into the cold open actually works better, since it allows for the later scenes to properly explore their hesitation to continue adventuring. I mean, hell, in the script there's a whole plot thread about Brian knowing they want to leave the Doctor, and there's a great scene between Rory and Brian after the anniversary party, with Brian encouraging them to settle down and adopt a child so he can become a granddad, something that obviously makes the planned PS minisode even more effective. This through line is sorely missing from the final episode, and it's a real shame it got cut because it plays so well in the shooting script. Everything is much more cohesive, especially with a more elaborate final scene full of references that truly emphasises how much the Doctor has dominated the lives of the Ponds. A big problem with Power of Three is how stunted it all is, with almost 2 episodes worth of content smushed into one. But this script solves so many problems with just a few lines of dialogue that never made it in. Moments like the Doctor showing how many emergency calls he's missed when trying to live a normal life, humanity's paranoia and finger pointing regarding the cubes. With a few lines of dialogue, we can get a much better idea of the international tensions the cubes created, especially since there's an explanation of 7 cubes getting into security systems, with one trying to launch missiles. Just with these lines and these explanations, it's so much more obvious that part of the plan is getting humanity to destroy itself. The Shakri proving a point with how much of a plague humanity is. Oh, and speaking of the Shakri, the original script reveals the orderlies are androids, which Rory fights, along with the Shakri's introduction being much more imposing and notable. A startling entrance, so much more interesting than him just appearing as a hologram in the actual episode. There has always been a lot of speculation and rumour that the ending of Power of Three feels so rushed because actor Steven Berkoff was so difficult to work with and actively hindered production. I guess you could call him Steven Uncooperative Actor. And this shooting script seems to be the most concrete, bulletproof evidence yet. It seems that the original ending saw Amy and Rory ambush the Shakri with the orderly syringes to incapacitate him while the Doctor uses his sonic to trigger the ship blowing up. The Shakri swearing vengeance as they escape, the classic, "I'll get you next time, Doctor," in a Big Finish box set in 15 years' time. This obviously couldn't be any more different to what the final product offers, where the Doctor just kind of flashes the Sonic while Amy and Rory just kind of stand there. Now, I won't pretend this original ending was good. It's still very rushed in that classic Chris Chibnall way, but it definitely is a lot better than what we ended up getting.
It's going to release more cubes.
Speaking of better endings, Angels Take Manhattan had an ending that saw quite a lot of changes since the read-through script released here, but we'll get to that in a moment, because there's a bunch of other changes first. And I don't just mean the Doctor saying, "bitch." Now that's a certified Moffat moment. This read-through script is full of expanded dialogue, like references to the Wedding of River song and a mention of the Byzantium in relation to the paradoxes of the ending. I can obviously see why these scenes were cut, but they do add a lot of extra depth and continuity to both the presence of the angels and River Song herself. Speaking of, this original version of the episode did such a better job explaining the angels in the narrative. There's the question of whether the angels built Winter Key or just took it over, with the interesting line, they have an affinity with stone, or maybe they just took it over. There's always been a question of whether the angels are actually stone or just look stone, and I feel like this is a bit of an acknowledgement of that. Although it does then quite literally suggest they're made of stone when Amy just kicks a bunch down like dominoes to kickstart the chase sequence. Yeah, that's just awful. And I'm glad it didn't make it into the final episode. It's almost as bad as them moving. What is it about Amy Pond and just bringing the worst out of the angels? But interestingly, I appreciate this script explaining that the angels work on fixed cycles, which is why Amy could find Rory so easily, because the angel that got them both sends people to the same times and places, compared to it being seemingly completely randomized like we always assumed. I really don't understand why this little line was cut, because it's so important for that ending, and it suddenly starts to make sense. In the actual episode, it obviously meant to be a leap of faith for love, but this specific line is just that guarantee explaining why River is so willing to encourage the risk. It's a big omission in my opinion. Just like, the omission of you not having hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, I've seen you. You watch all these videos and you don't do it. Just subscribe, man. Hit the bell as well. You may as well while you're there. But by far the most important and stark omission from this episode is the true emotional impact of the ending upon the Doctor. Right from the get-go, there are references to the Doctor travelling alone, keeping continuity with episodes like Dinosaurs on a Spaceship and A Town Called Mercy, with the original ending of Angels Take Manhattan serving as the payoff to that storyline. There's a fantastic line about his vulnerability at losing Amy and Rory, how even if they find each other and live from their perspective, from his, they'll just turn to dust. It touches upon that sad, ancient weariness of the main character, something we've seen multiple times as he fears outliving his companions and loved ones. And in this read-through script, we can see how that's very intentional as motivation for the Doctor's grief and sorrow at the end, because he's been travelling alone and developing these darker traits. His initial reaction here is one of rage, promising to turn the angels into a desert of ash and dust for what they've done. An outburst you can imagine coming from the 12th Doctor, overwhelmed with fury and showing his age in a much darker way than we're used to. With this context, it makes so much more sense for River to call him a psychopath. It doesn't feel out of place like it does in the final product. And most importantly, it justifies the afterward scene as a way to pacify the Doctor and talk him down from seeking vengeance. This read-through features a much longer afterword, Amy imploring her dear friend to not get lost in the sky, clearly setting up his cloud presence in the snowman. Lastly, for this afterword is outright verbal confirmation that the Doctor returns for little Amelia in the garden. Amy explains that she always knew the Doctor would return for her as a little girl because he did, something she had to keep secret from him because it's at this point in the timeline. I get why they cut this from the actual version and just had it as an implication instead, but it's interesting to see this kind of outright confirmation now, even if it does raise way too many questions of its own. Speaking of outright confirmation, the first draft of Hyde, known as Phantoms of the Hex, confirms something huge about the episode, which had already been floating around out there, but now we have outright proof. First of all, the episode is quite similar in broad strokes, only with different bits of interplay between the Doctor and Clara that never made it in, although that brilliant hand-holding scene isn't even in this draft. There's also a cut shot of Caliburn House in a future Ice Age desolate city while the Doctor and Clara travel through its history, something that would have no doubt been absolutely gorgeous to look at. But by far the biggest revelation of this early draft is how the story was heavily tied to Time Lord mythology. The Pocket Universe is referred to as the Hex by the Time Lords, with the monster the Revenant of Anathenon, the Lost Lord. Rather than the Crooked Man, this creature would have been a Gallifreyan bogeyman legend, the first Time Lord to travel the Hex and becoming trapped in an eternity of worlds, wanting to return to our universe to feast on Time Lords and TARDISes, not unlike House, which is probably part of why it never happened. It even speaks, another stark difference to the Crooked Man of the final episode. According to this draft, the Lost Lord had watched the Doctor from afar, choosing him as a victim and trying to bait him into the Hex so it could drain him and cross back over. I love how it's described as draining him to become more human, but having these big monstrous teeth, a really cool visual. In the end, it was Moffat who suggested the inclusion of the Crooked Man and its love story because he thought the Lost Lord was a bit too shallow, although the Pocket Universe was still referred to as the Hex until it was dubbed over later on. Personally, I'm much happier with the Crooked Man storyline we did get, since, as we've found out in recent years, it's kind of boring to see Time Lords and gods wanting to get into our universe to destroy everything. You know, it may as well have been Omega. Whilst we're on the topic of returning Time Lords, by far the most shocking and out of left field thing to come out of these scripts is an early draft of Night of the Doctor. Not only was this meant to be a 2-part short, but instead of Ahilia, we actually would have seen the Rani return to guide the Doctor through his regeneration, herself in a new incarnation, although we don't know any details about her appearance. The decision to bring the Rani back like this is absolutely wild, especially since it's a bit random for her to have joined the Sisterhood of Khan. She wants to help the Doctor purely because she lives in the universe and obviously doesn't want to see its destruction, which feels at least somewhat faithful to her characterization as an ethically and morally bankrupt scientist. There's some gold in there, like the Rani calling the Doctor a hypocrite regarding weapons, and the brilliant line of the Doctor maintaining that he is still a Time Lord, it's the rest of them who changed, which is a fantastic way of driving home just how much the Time Lords have been twisted and corrupted over the course of the war. And the culmination of the short sees the Rani outright tell him to become a warrior, not giving him options like Ahilia does. There's only one route for the Doctor, further showing how severe the Time War has become. Now, out of all the scripts that were released, this Night of the Doctor one is the weirdest, and because of the Rani, the most dubious? I haven't really touched upon it yet, but this whole script release has come from one random Reddit account with no other posts, so there's no way to properly verify their authenticity. It would be a very elaborate hoax with no clear motivation, but it's still possible to be a hoax regardless because of conveniently fanwank aspects like this return of the Rani. Not because it was difficult on a copyright level like it was in more recent years, both Pip and Jane Baker were still alive and therefore able to consent to her return, but more because of how unnecessary it was, even for such a fanwanky short. It makes me wonder just how early this draft was, or maybe it was even a dummy draft to begin with. Something Moffat wrote in case of leaks to sow the seeds of doubt or create deliberate misinformation. But regardless of how real it might be, it's still fascinating to imagine the Rani in this position, and surely the basis of a what-if scenario, since there's no way she wouldn't come back again afterwards. Hello, Harbo from the future here, and as I'm editing this video, actually Moffat himself came onto Twitter and responded to friend of the channel George Sherd talking about these scripts, and he revealed that yes, this was actually in the plan, and he's actually forgotten it because it was that long ago. So what happened was it was perceived that the Rani would be a waste to throw away in this mini-sode here, so that's why it didn't happen, and then Moffat put the Sisterhood in there instead with Ahila. So it's verified the scripts, so basically the last minute or so is completely moot now, but there you go. Moffat himself has come out and explained it, and also added on that, yep, there were no rights issues with the Rani. So that's the deal with that script, and we heard from the man himself. Lastly, the final script from this treasure trove is the shooting script for Time of the Doctor, which introduces all sorts of new little pieces of lore and trivia. For example, the Doctor got handles from Maldovar Market, and Christmas Town is actually a snow farm. It's not vital information, of course, but it fleshes things out just a little, just like the confirmation of this woman Linda being Clara's dad's girlfriend, and more moments of her and Clara at odds, as Clara has many more awkward attempts at jokes. I also find it really interesting how this version of the episode reveals that the Doctor has a wooden leg after a so-called tsunami snake attacked the town and bit it off, causing his limp throughout. This was always a rumour that would happen because of Matt Smith's real leg injury at the time, and it formed part of the tie-in novel Tales of Trenzalore. But this shooting script shows outright proof that there was meant to be an explanation. But the multiple lines of dialogue referring to this wooden leg were cut from the final episode, and now we can actually see what they were. The biggest consequence of these script changes, however, is what it does to Tasha Lem as a character. In the actual final episode, there isn't really much going on there. She just exists, and we're meant to just accept it and her weird relationship with the Doctor. However, in this shooting script, we learn more about Tasha, how her home planet had such a competitive ecosystem that everyone has to become a compulsive killer. To seek peace is true divinity for her kind because it's so unnatural for them. Explaining her faith and theology as part of the Church of the Papal Mainframe. We also see how much more conflicted she is throughout the story, especially when the Dalek puppets her. There's more of a sympathetic slant to it, and she actually has a character arc, even pointing Clara to the TARDIS at the end like a ghostly spectre. It's a real shame all of this interesting stuff about Tasha got cut, leaving her as such a flat and typically Moffat-y male gaze character. The ending of the episode also gives us confirmation that River and Rory were meant to be in the Doctor's pre-regeneration vision alongside Amy, but also Barnable and Handles were supposed to be there too. It's fitting, of course, because of the episode itself, but they still would have felt a bit out of place compared to the other more established characters. However, something we didn't already know was that the Doctor's final speech was actually longer, with this shooting script making him a little more vulnerable and anxious about the impending change, wondering if he looks ready and questioning whether he was too silly, before reassuring himself that he was funny and he didn't run away when it mattered. This whole little preamble before his now iconic speech was completely cut, and I'm actually kind of glad it was. It doesn't add much, and it actually makes the 12th Doctor seem more antagonistic, because 11 suggests 12 is going to take away these positive aspects rather than it being a regeneration. Because, people were already hostile towards the 12th Doctor from the get-go because, he dared to be old. And I feel like this line would have made it so much worse, framing it in all the wrong ways. Regardless, it's still truly fascinating to see these glimpses into a slightly different regeneration scene, and it makes me wonder what was cut from other regenerations that we don't know about. How different were these other speeches? What would have happened if they hadn't been trimmed for time or tone? I guess we'll never know. Unless, you're one of the people that bought any of the other scripts. I don't even know if there were other regeneration episodes there. But if you have them, post them online. It's better than just keeping them in a mouldy basement forever. Recently, I made a video all about Doctor Who's deleted scenes and the different pictures they paint for existing episodes. There were entirely different endings and cut character motivations. It was absolutely fascinating to dive into the episodes and made me really interested in other cut material. So naturally, when these scripts were released online, immediately afterwards pretty much, it felt like Christmas came early. with all these alternative versions of episodes we know very well. Hyde being a completely different storyline, Angels Take Manhattan showcasing more of the Doctor's darkness and vengeful anger, Power of Three actually having a coherent story. These scripts are a window into a whole different world of Doctor Who, with aspects that could make or break the episodes and completely change how we see them. It's also just really cool to see the process in action, the evolution of these stories as you go through different drafts, how there were different titles for episodes like Hyde, and how it had a full-on Time Lord villain that then never appeared and got completely changed. It just really interests me seeing these different versions of episodes that we've become so familiar with. But what about you? Do you think any of these changes were good? Do you think they were bad? Have you read the scripts? If not, what are you waiting for? Go look at them. I'll post the Reddit link in the description or something. Because yeah, there's just PDFs of all these episodes and it's absolutely incredible to look at what could have been. So with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a very short turnaround compared to my usual ones, so, you know, at least if you haven't already liked the video, please like it just for the fact I was able to do something quick for once. Yeah, rest in peace my weekend. But thank you all very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez, my Diamond level patrons, Sapphic Flame and Valtar, and all my Gold level patrons, Daniel Shillito and James Aleula Waterhouse. Thank you for supporting the channel.